Imagine lining up every World Cup ever played, all the way back to 1930, and laying the results out like a single long timeline stretching across a room. Nearly 100 years of matches, thousands of goals, hundreds of heartbreaks. Now imagine stepping back and looking at the whole thing at once, not as separate tournaments, but as one continuous experiment in human competition. What do you see? You might expect randomness, chaos, a different champion every time, no rhyme or reason. But that is not what a century of data actually shows. The real answer is far stranger than luck. Hidden inside nearly 100 years of matches is a quiet structure, one that keeps repeating no matter which era you look at. Let's start with the most obvious pattern first. Only 8 nations have ever won the World Cup. 8 out of more than 200 countries that exist today, and out of dozens that have qualified for the tournament across the decades. Brazil, Germany, Italy, Argentina, France, Uruguay, England, and Spain. That's it. That's the entire list going back nearly a century. Why so few? Sports economist Stefan Szymanski, who has spent years analyzing football data alongside co-author Simon Cooper in their influential research on the economics of the sport, points to something surprising. Winning the World Cup correlates less with population size and more with something called footballing infrastructure, meaning coaching systems, youth academies, domestic league quality, and historical investment in sport. Population barely matters. India has over 1 billion people and has never come close to lifting the trophy. Uruguay, with a population smaller than many single cities, has won it twice. Here's where the data gets even more specific. Researchers studying nearly a century of results have found that a nation's number of professional players competing in strong domestic leagues predicts World Cup success far better than raw national wealth or population size. It's not about how many people love football in a country. It's about how many of those people are inside a competitive, well-funded system that trains talent from childhood into adulthood. Now here's a twist that surprises most people. Despite the small list of winners, the tournament has become dramatically harder to win over time, not easier. In the early decades, from 1930 through the 1950s, fewer nations had access to organized football infrastructure at all, which meant the pool of realistic contenders was small. As football globalized, especially from the 1970s onward, more countries developed serious programs, and the competitive gap narrowed. Data researchers analyzing goal differences and match closeness across decades have found that games have become statistically tighter over time, with fewer blowout scores in the modern era compared to early tournaments. In other words, it used to be easier to dominate. Now, dominating is nearly impossible without extreme consistency. This is where squad continuity enters the picture. Analysts studying winning teams across different decades have noticed that champions tend to share one quiet trait: a stable core group of players who have played together for years before the tournament even begins. Chemistry, it turns out, is measurable. Teams assembled at the last minute from talented individuals consistently underperform compared to teams built around long-term partnerships on the field, even when the individual talent level is lower. There's also a geographic pattern that researchers have puzzled over for decades. Until very recently, no European team had ever won a World Cup held in the Americas, and no South American team had ever won one held in Europe. This trend held for an astonishing 68 years, essentially never broken, until France won in 2018 while playing on Russian soil, an event statisticians still study closely because it broke a pattern many assumed was close to a law. So what does this mean going forward? It means the pattern isn't magic, and it isn't destiny either. It's the visible outcome of long-term investment, systemic depth, and continuity, colliding with a tournament that still leaves plenty of room for chaos. A nation can build the infrastructure, develop the players, create the continuity, and still lose to a single moment nobody predicted. That combination, deep structure wrapped around real unpredictability, is exactly why the sport keeps generating new headlines every 4 years while somehow still being dominated by the same short list of nations, decade after decade. A century of data doesn't just tell you who has won. It tells you what winning actually requires, and it's rarely what fans assume in the moment. Not luck alone, not talent alone, but decades of invisible groundwork, laid long before a single ball is kicked in the tournament itself. And that is the real story hidden inside 100 years of World Cups. Not a random shuffle of champions, but a quiet, repeating blueprint, written slowly, tournament by tournament, long before anyone in the stadium ever sees it.